This week we ask you, do you know the difference between cash and equity in your business and what McDonald's has been doing to the Big Mac? Welcome to the Profit Cash Growth Podcast. This is the podcast for 6 and 7 figure business owners who are looking to grow a financially successful business. My co-host Claire Hancock is a finance director, chartered accountant and entrepreneur. And every week I'll be exploring guidance and frameworks designed to help you increase your profits, improve your cash flow and grow your business. A very good day to you, Claire, and what a week it's been. What a busy, monumentous news week we've had this week.
Oh, it's been epic. We are recording this a couple of days after the unsurprising election result. What is a little bit more surprising is that England beat Switzerland. That was a nice surprise, wasn't it, on a Saturday evening?
Things
Who would have thought that?
Clearly only get better.
I think it's quite interesting, actually, because we were reading a news article this morning about sort of the mass hysteria that was happening in the UK in 1997, all of the good things, what we were listening to on the radio.
Yes,
Titanic
that sign
was
of
released.
Optimism and all the rest of it. Well, actually, didn't I...
Eurovision Song Contest.
But didn't I come back on Friday when I went out saying... I know that Keir Starmer said he's going to start work immediately, but I wasn't expecting it to be this immediate because every road was closed and all the potholes were being filled in.
Yeah, it definitely did seem...
Absolutely insane. And there seemed to be more police on the streets as well already.
Yeah, obviously that was nothing to do with him, though.
Well,
that
just
was
a pure coincidence.
Our outgoing Conservative MP, unfortunately, Andrew Selous.
Exactly. Anyway, shall we see what I've got for this week's news story of the week? And it's not probably what you expect.
So normally when we are recording the podcast, we spend a little bit of time planning what we're going to say. We discuss the news story, what points each other wants to get across. But this week, I have absolutely no idea what news story of the week Simon is about to introduce to you. So
you have a little bit of an idea because the argument we just had about it. But anyway, we're going to talk about the humble Big Mac, McDonald's sort of signature product. And how is this relevant to business?
Well, I've got a confession to make, and I've never ordered a Big Mac in McDonald's in my whole entire life. I've had the occasional bite of a Big Mac when you order them, but I've never eaten one. I don't get what all the fuss is about, but what exactly is going on in the world of the Big Mac, Simon?
Well, it's not just the Big Mac, actually, it's the quarter pounder as well they've done. But what's been going on is, this is an article I read from McDonald's head chef, and believe it or not, in the background, they've been improving both the Big Mac and the quarter pounder. And I think this is interesting because this is about those tiny little wins that happen in business to help sort of improve the product and keep customers retained. And what's interesting about the story is it's all about how they've had to do this effectively discreetly. They've not gone out there and made a big song and dance about how, the Big Mac's getting better and it's getting more delicious.
Could you imagine, though, the outrage if McDonald's had even suggested that they change the Big Mac recipe?
And I think that's precisely the point, isn't it? Is that here's a brand that goes back absolutely years. It has a signature number of products that people absolutely expect to be the same.
It's like a cult, isn't it?
Yeah, no matter where they go. But yet have the same pressure that any business has to make sure that those things stay cutting edge, as delicious as possible. So it's interesting because they've done sort of 4 very subtle things, but they are absolutely certain from their customer research that they've created a better Big Mac than before. Can you guess what the 4 things are they've done to the Big Mac, Claire? What areas would you play with if you had the choice?
Well, I think probably there's 2 signature elements that I think make a Big Mac and give it a very distinctive taste. Well, probably 3. It's the bread, the patty, the burger patty, and the sauce.
Yes, I think you've got, well, two of those are of the 4.
I mean, other than a bit of iceberg lettuce, I don't think there's anything else.
So number 1 is
Big Mac is there.
They've changed the bun. So the bun is now a brioche style flavoured bun, slightly sweeter, as if you thought you could make their bread even sweeter.
Way.
But yes, that is the case. And interestingly, lots of the things they've done is about the cooking styles and the things they're doing in-house, not the product. So one of the cooking things they've changed is they're toasting the bun for longer to make it hotter.
Okay. I guess that How is that relevant, though, if your Big Mac isn't cooked fresh, which most Big Macs probably aren't? They're
saying that there's 2 parts to this, and I'll come on to this because it's about the cheese as well that this helps. But the bun's hotter, therefore keeping the whole product hotter when the customer receives it. But also the cheese as well. They're saying that the hotter but the hotter bun and the slightly hotter beef patty, because they've slightly changed the heat in which they cook them, melts the cheese into more of an emulsion than it was before, and again helps the taste experience. So that's interesting. And finally, the one that you probably wouldn't have gone is the onions. Now, this is really, really subtle, but usually they used to put those like diced raw onions in the burgers.
Okay.
Actually, for the first time ever, they're putting the onions on the grill and slightly like crisping them down into the burger, apparently, to really help mulch that onion flavour into the Big Mac. But anyway, fascinating. I thought that there's a massive company and there's an example of not resting on your laurels, but actually trying to just keep making things slightly, but also taking into account the fact that, you know, they've got that difficult consideration of alienating people. Do you remember when cream egg changed the cream egg? The uproar?
No, because I can't say that I've ever loved anything enough to care whether it got changed or not. I don't know. But yeah, I think what you're touching upon McDonald's there, if anybody ever thought that McDonald's was investing in improving the Big Mac, you know, it's probably not even something that's a consideration, but it just goes to show that no matter how iconic a product, no matter how good you think your business is, you can still improve everything.
Yep. And usually it is about these tiny, they're talking about these tiny 1% gains. And the best business leaders and owners we ever talk to talk about these 1% gains. And it's the 1% gains consistently that help move the business forward, isn't it?
Well, who would have thought there was such an important lesson to be learnt from the humble Big Mac?
Forget the change of government. It's all about the humble Big Mac.
But do let us know, are you a Big Mac fan? And did you know about this change? Did you notice it? And what do you think? I'd be absolutely fascinated to find out whether anybody did know about these changes before Simon told you.
Great. Well, let's move on to this week's deep dive where we're talking about cash versus equity.
So probably maybe a few words that people are not quite sure what we mean when we say equity, but that's what this podcast is for, is bringing you lots of business knowledge and explaining some of the more slightly unusual financial management terms that you might hear and learning about how you can utilise them in your business.
The only place that I sort of put the word equity is against the property world, because people synonymously
in your home, how much
equity in their home.
Yep.
So, you know, when you're talking about in the business world,
well, I think the two sort of cross over quite well. If you actually think about equity that you've got in your home, it's kind of what's yours.
Yep.
And your equity is the amount of money that you put in the first place, normally your deposit. And then it's any value that you've got as your property price increases and you have that value that belongs, it's your equity. And I think owning a business is pretty similar, that your equity is made up of two key elements. It's the capital that you put into your business when you start it. So for most people, normally they actually put in 100 ordinary shares and you must buy those shares from your business. So you normally buy 100 ordinary shares at £1. So you put in £100 of equity. That's the most common, although you can actually do whatever you want. You could just do one share at 1p, do anything. But most common in the UK is 100 ordinary shares at £1. So you put £100 of equity into your business, and then your equity grows by making profit. That is how your equity grows. So you've got your original share capital, and then your equity is your retained profit. So all of the profit that you make that is kept in your business is what your equity is.
Okay, so that is the determination of what equity is in a business format. Why, Claire, is this a key KPI for business owners to track?
Yeah, so it's something that I always make sure is brought to every business owner's attention when we're looking at their management accounts on a monthly basis. And actually, you don't see the equity unless you're looking at the balance sheet. And when I start working with business owners and when I'm speaking to them, probably the most common thing is that a lot of people are now getting more comfortable with looking at their P&L, I think it's fair to say. So, you know, with like Xero is probably the most popular bookkeeping package out there. When you've got Xero, it's very easy to log on to Xero and have a look at your monthly P&L. And generally, if you are a business that particularly struggles with cash flow or just, you know, keeping an eye on cash flow, then also having a look at your bank balance, understanding what payments you've got coming in the next couple of weeks also is becoming a little bit more mainstream. But I come across probably 1 in 50 business owners that are looking at their balance sheet on a monthly basis. Yeah. And if you're not looking at your balance sheet, you don't know what your equity is. And
so why does it matter to me as a business owner, and what would good look like in that number? What am I looking for?
So once you've made profit on your business, it goes to equity, and equity is what gets distributed as dividends.
Okay, so it's like a holding pen for your profit after tax, so to speak.
So it's actually in the UK, you're not allowed to have what's known as negative equity caused by a dividend. So you have to have equity to be able to issue yourself a dividend. And we all know from being a business owner that, it's us that gets paid last. 9 times out of 10, we pay ourselves last. And for tax reasons, we tend to pay ourselves out of dividends. So if your business isn't making profit, there's no equity and therefore you can't take dividends. But also when you've got equity, you can be a bit clever with, what tax year you take it in to benefit from, if tax rates are changing or your income's changing from one year to the next, you can be really clever with what you do with equity in terms of maximising your earnings.
So what's the difference between equity and cash?
So the reason why this came to the forefront of my mind is because I started working with a new business, and one of the first things that we looked at was I look at a business's balance sheet. I always start with the balance sheet. It's the first financial statement of cash flow, P&L, balance sheet. I always go to the balance sheet first, because if your balance sheet isn't right, your P&L definitely isn't right. So for me as an accountant, I learned over the years, always start with the balance sheet. If there are any issues, any errors, any questions, you'll find them primarily in the balance sheet. So I looked at his balance sheet and he had 1.2 million of equity, which, is pretty good going for a small business that's been going about 10 years to rack up 1.2 million worth of profit that
he can take in dividends.
Yeah. And
amazing. Yeah.
He has been taking dividends over, the past 10 years as well. So he's been paid a salary and he's been taking dividends, but he's got 1.2 million left in his business.
So I assume this guy's a very well-off guy and doesn't need this money. So that's why he's not taking it.
No, that's not why he's not taking it. He's not taking it because he didn't know what equity was and he didn't know how much dividend he could take. He'd been working with an accountant that simply did a calculation. His accountant would say to him every year, how much money do you need your earnings to be this year? And 9 times out of 10, he'd either say, oh, keep me in the 20% tax bracket, or he'd say, process my earnings so that they sit just below the 100k bracket, that before the upper tier kicks in.
The loss of the personal allowance.
Allowance. So simply that was what the accountant was doing. And nobody had ever pointed out to him that he had 1.2 million of equity in his business, which was essentially his money that he could take out the business if he wanted to.
So he, like most business owners, might not know where that number is, but surely he's probably obsessive about his bank balance. And isn't his bank balance got £1 million in it?
No, his bank balance only had 300k in it.
So why the difference between the 1.2 million and the bank balance, and how can he take that money if he hasn't got the cash?
Yeah, sorry. The equity was actually 1.5 million. The difference was 1.2 million. So, and this is when I kind of sat down and he said, well, he actually said to me, for the past 3 years, I've actually only earned 50k out of my business. And I was like, well, actually, you've got 1.2 million of equity in this business. So he had come to me saying, I'm not earning enough money. I feel like he does about 3 million turnover. He was like, for the turnover that I've got, I feel like I should be able to take much more money out of my business.
Sure.
Something's not right. And I said, well, actually, your issue is not that you don't have a really profitable business. It's actually you're making really good profit. You've got all the equity in your business. The reason you can't take it out is because you don't have the cash flow. And so then we looked at his balance sheet and we looked at where all the cash had gone. And the cash was tied up in stock, in equipment, where he'd bought equipment for cash rather than getting finance on it.
Yep.
And then the biggest place where his money was tied up was in giving free credit to customers.
So is his mistake, for want of a better word, or learning around the fact that he's spent lots of his cash he could have taken on assets rather than getting them through lease finance or that type of thing and spreading that money out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you see the disparity between something like cash and equity, that's when you start to understand the link between those decisions that you're making in your business and what that actually means for your business long term. Because like I say, this is actually a really highly profitable business to be generating 1.5 million. If you add in his dividend, it probably generated about 2.5 million of profit in around 10 years, which is pretty good going for a small business. But he just wasn't able to either realise that and earn what he felt like he should be earning for his role as a managing director of a multi-million-pound business, nor did he have the cash to now be reinvesting back in his business. Yes, he had bought some assets, and yes, he did have a high level of stock, but that had been the case for several years. And now he's looking at his business saying, well, actually, I need to be renewing some of my equipment. Some of my machines need renewing, and I don't have the cash there to do that.
So by not thinking properly how he made those decisions in the first place, he's got two issues going on. He's got the ability to have the cash to continue the investment in his business, but also you've got this level of getting the right reward for the, I'm sure the stress, risk and difficulty of running a business of that size and not feeling properly rewarded could grind you down and ultimately lead you to walking away from such a good business. So yeah, it's getting that balance right, isn't it?
And I think it's very easy to talk about the disparity between profit and cash. But whenever you're talking about the disparity between profit and cash, you're looking at just that individual year. And it's very easy to say, if you get to the end of your year and you've made, let's say, 200k profit, you can say, well, yeah, my customers just haven't paid me yet. As soon as my customers pay me that 200k, then I've got that profit and it's mine. But actually you haven't, because yes, those customers pay you 200k, but then another bunch of customers still owe you 200k. So you never actually realise that cash. And when you look at the disparity between equity and cash, that is your whole business's life worth of decisions wrapped up into those two numbers.
Yeah, it's interesting when you put it like that. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And it's that accumulation of that year on year as you've given more and more credit to your customers as you've grown, as your stock numbers gone up, as you've invested in more and more fixed assets, machines, vehicles, whatever it is that your business needs on a long-term basis. It's all of those decisions accumulate into that gap between cash and equity. And I think that's why it's so incredibly powerful, because like I say, on an annual basis, the disparity between profit and cash is probably a couple of $100,000 for most businesses and is not that significant. But when you look at equity versus cash, it can be quite significant.
So in summary, is it always bad if there's a gap between cash and equity? And is there a ideal balance that you should be looking for? Or is it every business is different?
Every business is different, and it is not necessarily a problem. But what I think is really powerful is when you know what that number is. Because if you look at that number and you're like, okay, yeah, it's 1.2 million, but I've just spent £1 million buying a commercial premises. Fine. That's a strategic long-term decision that you've just made.
Well, all you've done there is you've moved your equity from one place to another. It's still sat there.
Yeah.
And that's an investment.
But if you are in the situation where you're thinking, where on earth is my cash? I don't understand why I'm not earning what I think I should, or I don't understand why I don't have enough money to invest in my business. You need to be trying to firstly identify what that gap is between cash and equity, and then thinking, how do I close that gap? And it's the not knowing that's the problem, rather than having the gap that's the problem. Because a lot of the time we make decisions and we are deliberately putting that gap there. We deliberately need stock in our business because without stock we can't sell anything. And we deliberately need to give our customer terms because it keeps us competitive in the marketplace. So sometimes there's legitimate reasons, but often business owners are just a little bit blind sometimes to exactly what the numbers are telling you.
And that's because they're not looking at the balance sheet, I guess.
Yeah, they don't understand
things
the power
like this.
of
They
it.
don't even know what equity is.
Yeah.
I imagine there's a huge amount of people that are listening to this that this is the first time they've heard about how this works. So these numbers they could be tracking that are below the P&L.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Claire. That was fascinating. I'm sure certainly a little bit more technical than the usual conversations, but I think one really worth knowing for business owners, and they should really dive a bit more into their business.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's move on to this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra.
So this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra, it's a little bit of fun, really, for anybody that pays the extortionate fees every month for Sky TV and feels a little bit annoyed their new Sky Stream app not being quite as good as it should be. They do have one perk, and that is Sky VIP. Now, I haven't really used this before, and actually, it's probably like 3 or 4 years since I've used it. I went on a bit of a blitz on the Sky VIP app, put my email address in all of the polls for like free sports tickets, free concert tickets, etc., and I got free concert tickets, didn't I, Simon?
To Paloma Faith, didn't you?
To Paloma Faith.
An actual name I'd heard of.
Yeah, at Thetford Forest, free VIP tickets, actually. So that was a really quite pleasant surprise. Had a little day off work because it was Thursday.
There were VIP tickets.
Yeah.
So what did you get for that? To be close to the stage and things?
In the VIP area, yeah.
Okay, nice, fair enough.
But no, it meant that you could watch her rather than having to watch the big screen.
Right,
so there was some benefit to it. But yeah, I must say, I don't think I would have forked out £125 per ticket to drive to Thetford on a Thursday evening outdoors to see Paloma Faith. I think all of the risks involved in that.
And
with
if
the
I'd
weather.
have won it, I would have seen that as a hassle even doing it in the first place. But there you go.
But yeah, Sky VIP, if you're paying for Sky every month, make sure that you're putting your email address in the Sky VIP app and applying for all of the tickets. They have like Wimbledon tickets, Euro tickets have been on there.
And the little things as well. Like I got the free Ghostbusters film this month, didn't I? Ghostbusters Afterlife. They get that free to VIP customers rather than £8. So yeah.
You can get like free Sky Cinema passes as well for some of the movies on there. So there's loads of things on the Sky VIP app. But also you can win some really cool sports tickets and event tickets like the Grand Prix, tennis, football, rugby, etc. And, you can take your beloveds, you can take your staff, you can take your customers, whatever.
So there
absolutely
you have it.
Free. So
it's all about the rewards you don't think you're tapping into. So if you're not tapped into the Sky VIP stuff, then do tap into it because it sounds absolutely excellent.
And the tax-free rewards as well. Let's bring that back to my house. Completely tax-free.
Well, going back to our original story, the McDonald's one, you tapped me into my McDonald's rewards, didn't you? Because I realised I hadn't switched it on in my app recently.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you do frequent McDonald's. Mostly, you get chicken wraps at lunchtime and you get coffees, don't you?
Yeah, coffee's great.
But you have to activate the rewards on there, the reward points. They're quite crafty, actually, because you think when you get the app and you sign in that you'll be collecting your points. But I was telling you I had all these free coffees and
this is true.
Free wraps, and you were like, how do you get that?
And everybody's got a membership nowadays, haven't they? So of some sort. So it's difficult to keep track of them all, but a few of them are quite good now. So Sky VIP, do check that out and do just apply for all the competitions. It's free. And you never know, you might get one for Paloma Faith. So anyway, thanks for joining us for this week's podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was useful as always. If you want to speak to Claire or any of her team, you can check them out at profitcashgrowth.com or check out the YouTube channel if you want to deep dive further into small business education. And we will see you again next week.